source for the 2004 vote. Washington, D.C. holds a Democratic primary on Tuesday. Today, three of the candidates, Congressman Dennis Kucinich, Carol Moseley Braun, and Al Sharpton, took part in a debate put together by George Washington University and WTOP Radio. It's about an hour.
That the 2004 primary started in the snows of D.C. My first question, Jim, is to Governor Dean. Governor Dean, if you cared so much about D.C. and you were so committed to the voting rights of the residents of the District of Columbia to have representation in the U.S. Congress, why aren't you here today?
Okay, the next question, Colbert King.
The district's Democratic Mayor Anthony Williams, the D.C. Council's longtime education chairman Kevin Chavis, and the president of the D.C. School Board all support school vouchers, and this question will be for all three candidates. Do you agree with these local leaders in their support for school vouchers? Start with you, Ambassador Brown.
No, I don't. Quality public education is the cornerstone of the American dream. And vouchers undermine systems of public education because what they essentially do is spin off those families, those young people who frankly would probably make it anyway, and leave behind a public school system with all the problems but fewer resources with which to work. When I was in the United States Senate, the voucher plan that was so widely touted would essentially give a family $300, less than $300 a year, with which to supplement, to pay for the tuition for their children. Well, you can't buy an education in a private school with $300 a year, and I imagine you can't really buy an education in any of the public schools with $300 a year. And so what you essentially have is an attempt to tear apart public education and then provide an inadequate and a subsidy that falls far short of the needs of providing quality education in another setting for young people. It's an attractive idea for many people who have given up hope that the public schools can be improved, but it's a fraud in my opinion.
Bruce DuPoit.
Congressman Kucinich.
I'm on the Education Committee of the United States Congress, and on that committee I have consistently voted against vouchers. As a member of Congress, I voted against vouchers. I believe that public education represents the best hope that so many American children have for social and economic mobility. But we can understand the concerns that people have about the state of public education when an administration continues to cut funds for public education, when it increases the Pentagon budget at the expense of public education, when it takes this country towards war, which then saps our domestic vitality. We have to remember that education does not occur in a vacuum in any community. And the underlying causes of poverty in our society, whether we're talking about unemployment, the disparity in household wealth, have a reflection on what's going on in education in any community. So what we need to do is this. We need to create a living wage, we need to create housing opportunities, a full employment economy, and then when we fully fund public schools, our children will be able to have the kind of education they deserve in every city in this country.
Thank you. Reverend Sharpton.
I unequivocally am opposed to vouchers. I think that, first of all, the role of government is not to select some for better education. It's the role of government to try and provide quality education for everyone. And what we are seeing with vouchers, even at its best, you are selecting some students and leaving other students behind. Government's role is not ever to be selective. That's how we ended up with George Bush. The Supreme Court selected him, the people elected somebody else. Now what we're doing with vouchers is saying we're going to decide some students, by whatever scheme we design, we're giving a different opportunity, and we're almost writing off those that are left. Government should never be guilty of that. I'm unilaterally, unequivocally opposed to it. I think it is also a part of the whole step toward society being guided by right-wingers toward privatization of everything from health care to education to even being incarcerated. We must stop the drive toward privatization. We must protect children with public schools.
Bruce. The next question will come from Bruce DuPoit, but you'll excuse us for one moment while we have to take a break. You'll understand it on a morning like this for traffic and weather together.
What do you mean a morning like this?
Minute to give you a little more background on the D.C. presidential preference primary. The January 13th date makes this primary the nation's first. In fact, it's the first time the district has held that distinction. But claiming the coveted #1 slot has cost the city. The date falls outside the Democratic schedule. That means the primary won't be binding, and convention delegates don't have to cast their votes for the winner. But city leaders pushed the primary date ahead in the hope of drawing attention to the D.C. statehood debate, and they still believe the primary could produce a signal for the Democratic presidential candidates.
By statute, he plans to introduce a bill that would give D.C. a vote in the House. Why didn't the Democrats, when they controlled both the House and the Senate, attempt to go this route? It would have been both the right thing to do and also in the party's best interest. I'd like all three candidates to answer, beginning with Congressman Kucinich.
Well, I'm not here as an apologist for what Democrats failed to do when they should have done it. Had I had the opportunity to be in Congress at the time, I would have done then what I did in working with Eleanor Holmes Norton in supporting H.R. 1285, the No Taxation Without Representation Act of 2003, which found, among other things, that D.C. residents are the only Americans who pay federal income taxes but are denied voting representation in the House of Representatives. And I stand here very strongly in favor of D.C. statehood and making sure that D.C. can have 2 members in the Senate and 1 member in the House, and that D.C. is accorded the full privileges of statehood. You know, with a budget that's approaching $6 billion and being America's capital city, but also being a city with so many problems, D.C. represents all the hopes and dreams and also all the challenges of urban America. And I can't think of any more powerful cause than for our party to adopt the cause of statehood for D.C., and as president, I intend to lead the way in that.
Reverend Sharpton?
Well, I think the reason why we didn't get it under some of the time the Democrats were in is the same reason why you don't have all of the Democrats here today, is that some of us say one thing and do another. And I think that one of the reasons that I engaged in this candidacy in the first place is to deal with the hypocrisy in my own party. Before we go to November, everyone's trying to fast forward to November without dealing with a convention in July. We need to have a family meeting and discuss how we're going to function as a party. Before I would go to grandma's at Thanksgiving, my mother would have a meeting at our house so we know how to behave. We need to have a behavior meeting because we're not functioning right. The other candidates should be here, A. When I was as head of National Action Network, when I was head of the Ministers Division of the Rainbow Coalition, I worked with Ms. Norton and others for the last decade around this issue when the Democrats were there. We need statehood, and let's define statehood as representation in the Senate, in the Congress, legislative autonomy, judicial autonomy, and budget autonomy. Because some people are talking about statehood and really not talking about statehood. They're talking about something else. I want to be very clear. We're talking about real statehood, including a real state primary next Tuesday.
Ambassador Braun.
To begin with, the Democratic Party is comprised of lots of different views, and if anything, part of the primary process is to decide the direction our party will take. I hope our party will take a direction in support of statehood for the District of Columbia. This is an issue that I've worked on in the state legislature as well as in the United States Senate. Eleanor Holmes Norton and I were co-conspirators on District of Columbia issues on many, many occasions when I served in the Senate. On the 28th of March of 1981, I filed a resolution in the Illinois General Assembly calling for statehood for the District of Columbia. It didn't pass because it didn't have the support of the rest of the party. But that is where I think we have to start our work, is to talk to people about the realities of D.C. and to talk to people about the fact that it is taxation without representation, and to make the case to seize the moral high ground on this issue. Because at the end, that really is what it is. Shall this country tolerate the treatment of the citizens of the District of Columbia as less than equal than the citizens of any other part of the nation? And I think the answer will come back a resolute no. People in this country want to do the right thing if we encourage them to do it. Statehood is the right thing.
Mark Plotkin, would you like to ask a question of somebody in the room?
I would like to ask the question of Congressman Kucinich and then follow up to Congressman Braun, because I will relieve Reverend Sharpton.
Congressman Braun, you mean Senator?
Excuse me.
How
Senator
about Ambassador?
Braun, excuse me. Senator Ambassador Braun, pardon me. I'm only the political analyst. Reverend Sharpton has mentioned it, I didn't hear, in the Detroit debate about this issue. If this issue is so important that there be voting rights for the District of Columbia and there be statehood, why have you not mentioned it, and do you plan to mention it in future debates and in stump speeches?
Well, I've certainly been here in the district as an advocate of it.
Yeah, but the real audience is the national audience. 60% of the college graduates don't know of this injustice. Why have you not mentioned it?
I will say that
debate?
what you will find if you review my presentation in most of the debates is that I've spent most of the time talking about why the United States should get out of Iraq. And I've spent some time talking about why we need a universal single-payer health care program. And I've also spent some time talking about why we need to get out of NAFTA and the WTO and go back to bilateral trade conditioned on workers' rights, human rights, and environmental quality principles. I am strongly supportive of D.C. statehood. My presence here today is an indication of my support for the district. I have an apartment in the district. I work in the district. I'm proud to be here as part of my connection with the district. But I can tell you that, when I have the opportunity to mention in a debate, I'd be most happy to. But I've really been focusing, not that this isn't a top priority, but I've really been focusing all my energies and my intent in trying to raise the issue of the war in Iraq. That's where my focus has been. And there's a lot of issues that are urgent, including D.C. statehood.
Senator Braun, Ambassador Braun, why haven't you mentioned it in a national debate, and will you in the future?
Mark, I'm actually surprised that you would put that question. You're picking on your friends. Dennis Kucinich,
I've been accused of
Dennis Kucinich has taken up and spoken for the, I'm going to talk about you, Dennis, first, has spoken on behalf of the District of Columbia in venues in which it made no political sense for him.
But
he got
you
no
too?
man, and me as well. Not just spoken, no. I'm going to pull a Dennis now. I'm going to wave a piece of paper on radio. Here.
I did that so Howard Dean would see it. Though.
Right. I mean.
Well, he's not here. He wouldn't know anything.
House Joint Resolution 18 in 1981. You have no greater advocate on this issue than me, and it's one of not just words, but of deeds. I have worked to see to it that the District of Columbia get statehood since 1981. Now, I dare say you were in grammar school in 1981, Mark.
Thank you for the compliment.
You're welcome.
In fact, we're the same age.
Well, okay, so I was legislating or trying to legislate statehood for the District of Columbia when you were just getting your eyes open to this issue. I take second place to no one on this issue.
Thank you for your argument. Reverend Sharpton, why don't you, I'll ask a different question, let Colby talk, which I promised to do. Why do you think the 5 other major presidential candidates took their names off the ballot?
Well, let me first say, I think that we should applaud those that have come today. And the reason I brought it up in the debates, and I continue to, and I will Sunday in Iowa, is because it is a national issue, and it is hooked to the wall in this regard. How can we fight to give the right to vote to the people in the capital of Iraq in Baghdad and undermine the right to vote for the people in the capital of the United States in Washington, D.C.? So it's, to me, one issue. Why people didn't show up? I think because people have been allowed to feel that they can get away with it. And I think that is why it is important the people in the district on Tuesday stand with those that stood with them. Even if you think another candidate later, if you think your candidate's the winner, then vote November for him against Bush. On Tuesday, you need to send a message saying we are not going to regard those that disregard us and respect those. If you can't trust somebody when they need your vote, what do you think they're going to do for you after they get your vote? I mean, your leverage is now. If you can get your vote for nothing, you'll get less than nothing after you get the vote.
Once again, we ask the kind forbearance of the audience. We have to break for traffic and weather together.
Hi, I'm Dave Lucas with another D.C. primary update. On January 13th, voters will face 11 names on their D.C. ballot. At the top of that list, Howard Dean. A medical doctor, Dean began his political career in the Vermont State House back in 1982. He worked his way to the governor's mansion in the Green Mountain State in 1991. His presidential campaign has been supported by a strong grassroots effort that pushed him from long shot to leading contender. Throughout the campaign, Dean has characterized himself as an outspoken critic of the war in Iraq and Bush tax cuts. He's also, though, been known to openly criticize members of his own party with whom he disagrees. Dean is one of the 4 major candidates whose names appear on that D.C. ballot.
A little bit, and then he raised her college tuition.
Primary debate with major primary candidates Dennis Kucinich, Carol Moseley Braun, and Reverend Al Sharpton.
Hello, everybody. We throw it back to Colbert I. King for the next question.
Thank you. I'm going to ask each of the candidates to project herself and himself into the White House next January. And you're looking at the District of Columbia that faces a real structural deficit. And that means that despite having a balanced budget and controlling spending, the revenue stream that the city gets is not enough to cover its basic needs. And that's because of the federal presence that removes so much land from taxation, and because the district is not able to tax the incomes of people who work here but don't live here. What would you do as president to help the district address this structural deficit problem? And we'll start maybe with Reverend Sharpton and work our way through this way.
One, I, as president, would address the fact that we take so much out of the district and invest so little. I would not only increase what we invest, I would raise the question of statehood in my State of the Union address. I would stand, the Supreme Court has opened the way for a legislative remedy for statehood. I would, as president, use a bully pulpit and even try to do something unprecedented, and that is be part of sponsorship of legislation there and try to go into the Congress to get that through. I would raise the fact that we have no public hospital in the district. How can we talk about health care and in the nation's capital we don't have a public hospital to take care of those that work in government every day? In Ward 8, we can't go to a grocery store. I mean, I would talk about how the nation's capital represents the ills of this country, and as president, I want to lead the way by making the nation's capital a showcase of what I would want to do for the nation. I don't care what oratory you give the nation. If down the block people don't have a public hospital and around the corner they have a grocery store, we are not living up to the American dream right here where we execute government.
Structural deficit.
I thought the bell was
Congressman
knocked out.
Kucinich.
You meant shut up. Okay.
The structural deficit comes about more than anything because the D.C. doesn't have control over its own budget. The Congress does. So Congress, in effect, creates the conditions where the D.C. budget is always struggling. The last budget, I think, was for about $5.7 billion. And what the district needs are job programs because of the high rate of unemployment, particularly among African Americans. The district needs housing, affordable housing, as Reverend Sharpton pointed out, access to health care. The district needs infrastructure improvements, not just for the monumental Washington, but for the neighborhoods of the city, the investment that needs to be made in the neighborhoods to enable small business to be able to survive. The structural deficits that you talk about are directly related to the fact that D.C. doesn't have control over its own destiny, and that's why statehood is imperative.
Colby?
Very briefly, the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution is what keeps the district from getting tax revenues from all of the federal property that's located within the district. However, that clause should not mean that the federal government not pay something resembling rent to the residents of the District of Columbia, because after all, the services are required, the use of the land, the cleaning up of the snow, which I know panics this town, but all of those things are district functions for which the district does not get adequate subsidy and support from the national government. This is wrong. That the Supremacy Clause should not legitimate exploitation of the district and abuse of the district by the policymakers in Washington. So I think that there ought to be a formula to provide a consistent level of support, consistent with the amount of land use, Eleanor, that to the extent you have national monuments and offices and the like, there ought to be an equivalent or an equivalency of a property tax for the federal government that the federal government would give as a matter of course to the District of Columbia. That would solve your structural deficit problem.
Colby, you want a quick follow-up?
A quick follow-up, and this can get a yes or no answer to the structural deficit question. Do you support the district's right to impose a commuter tax on people who work here but don't live here? Yes or no?
No, it didn't work. We tried that in Chicago. It didn't work. It dried up jobs. I think it's important to create jobs here in the District of Columbia.
Tell me how that would work.
That the district would have the right to tax the incomes of people who work here but don't live here. At this point, the district is prohibited from doing that in the Home Rule Act.
Yeah, I think that I would support it.
I absolutely support it.
Thank you.
To Bruce DuPoit.
The president is going to announce next week plans to go back to the moon with a human colony or space station and eventually manned flights to Mars. When you balance the benefits of space exploration versus the needs that exist here at home, do you think this goal is a worthy one, Ambassador Braun?
That's where he gets his votes.
First off, let me get back a little bit on commuter tax. We wound up repealing that tax in Illinois. It was imposed in Chicago for exactly the same kind of inducements. You know, you see all these people coming into town and not paying for using the streets and whatnot, the lighting on the boulevards and the like. But it's a job killer, and you may want to take a real serious look at that.
You've got about 30 seconds.
30 seconds, quickly. We shouldn't be put in a position of positing space exploration and science against the real life needs of the people of the District of Columbia. I think the president's priorities are misplaced, but I do support exploration and I do support science, and I think we should be able to do both in this, the richest country in the world.
Congressman?
I've been a strong supporter of space exploration and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration because of the tremendous spin-off technologies which exist. And the creation of our jobs in the future will be tied directly to that. But I also want to explore planet Earth and planet DC, and to make sure that we use the considerable resource of this country, not to the exclusion of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, but the considerable resource of this country to focus on health and education and jobs here in the DC and across this country and our cities. Finally, this administration is interesting. They want to send people to Mars, but they're also for putting weapons in space. So maybe what they're getting ready for is, a war with Mars. And so we have to keep an eye on them since they're into unilateralism and preemption.
Reverend Sharpton.
I would like to suggest the president discover Ward 8 or Ward 7. I mean, it won't cost as much, and it would be just as enlightening for him. He should just get in his limo. I'd be willing to come over and take him, and we could explore right here in Washington something that he considers other than what he's familiar with. I spoke yesterday at Anacostia High School. They're trying to discover computers and things that we need for our school children. So I'm all for space exploration, but our priorities must be, in my judgment, what helps and maximize the working of this country. I'm not surprised, though, when you look at a president that we were attacked by Al-Qaeda, lost 3,000 lives between the Pentagon and New York. He goes after Hussein. We have a problem of unemployment, a problem of public education. He's going after Mars. So I think that we need a president that goes after what's in front of us rather than start searching for other things. That's why I think we really ought to just finance a shuttle to Crawford, Texas.
We are back with more of our presidential candidates debate after a break for traffic and weather together to Lisa Baden in the WTOP Traffic Center.
I'm Dave Lucas in the News Channel 8 studios with more on the major candidates who appear on the D.C. primary ballot. You're watching her take part in the debate. Former Illinois U.S. Senator Carol Moseley Braun. She landed in the national spotlight back in 1992 when she was the first African-American woman elected to the U.S. Senate. But after losing a re-election bid in 1998, then-President Bill Clinton appointed Moseley Braun as ambassador to New Zealand. She was one of the last candidates to make a bid in this presidential sweepstakes, but that hasn't slowed her campaign. She's taken a firm stance against the war in Iraq and is critical of the president's handling of the economy.
You're watching News Channel 8's special coverage of the D.C. presidential primary debate with major primary candidates Dennis Kucinich, Carol Moseley Braun, and Reverend Al Sharpton.
To me, that was interesting. There's a difference on that. I expect them all to say the same thing. I know.
Welcome back to our WTOP radio debate. Bruce Allen here with Mark Plotkin, Colbert I. King, and Bruce DuPoit, along with three of the Democratic candidates for president on the D.C. ballot who show in the national polls: Carol Moseley Braun, Al Sharpton, and Dennis Kucinich. In our last segment, we will have the candidates ask a question of each other, and we will also have a chance for closing statements. Mark Plotkin?
I don't mean to be a publicist for books, but I'm reading Master of the Senate by Robert Caro. Obviously, the legislators know that crafting legislation is like sausage. You really don't want to know how it's done. But the point is the outcome. Your president, Senator Braun, January 20th of next year, and the D.C. representation bill, which provides full representation, is having trouble getting through the Congress, the Senate and the House. How do you effectively, as a manager and not just speaking to the issue, make sure that it happens?
Well, that's a function of the legislative process. That's exactly what it is. And the president has a huge bag of tricks in regards to things that legislators want for their districts, in terms of issues that the legislators care about. And frankly, there's a process in which the executive engages with the legislative branch, and there's no reason why this can't get done, in my opinion. You asked a question at the beginning, why didn't the Democrats move this issue forward when we had control of the executive as well as the legislative branches? The short answer is there is no real good reason, and it's shameful that our party did not move this as part of its very serious agenda. Certainly, if you can get things done that you want to get done, it's a matter of priorities, and it's a matter of what kind of political capital you're prepared to spend in behalf of a given idea. I think that there is no higher issue of equality and of representation and going to the health of our democracy than making certain that the District of Columbia receives equality of treatment before the law of the United States.
Congressman Kucinich, you're the head of the Progressive Caucus, right?
Co-chair with Barbara Lee.
Thank you. Co-chair. There are 40 members. They're probably in the bag in terms of D.C. representation. But if you were elected president on January 20th of next year, and you have to convince some Democrats to vote for this, there are Democrats who aren't even for it, and more, you need some Republicans. I'm interested in the outcome. How do you get conservative Democrats or quiet anti-D.C. Democrats coupled with Republicans to vote for this bill so that you can sign the bill?
I think we need to take a step back, and that is that my role as the nominee of the party, my nomination as a standard bearer for the Democratic Party, and I think it would probably be true of either Ambassador Moseley Brown or Al Sharpton as well, would signal a sea change for progressive politics in this country and would enable us to create a rallying cry for Americans on D.C. statehood, on universal single-payer health care, on full employment economy with public works, on getting out of Iraq, and a whole range of things that we could really catalyze the American people to elect a progressive Congress. When FDR made his rallying cry, economic and social justice, in the 1932 election, the American people responded with 88 new members of the House and 13 new members of the Senate. So I would believe that my nomination would increase the possibility of creating a Congress that would make possible all of these changes, including D.C. statehood.
Reverend Sharpton, how do you accomplish what you passionately and eloquently advocate? And how do you get, I still ask the question, how do you get Republicans to vote for this issue?
One of the things when President Clinton was in office that I tried to get him to do, we had a huge march here around it, was around the question of racial profiling. We said use an executive order and challenge the Congress to override you. As president, I would issue an executive order and then challenge the Congress to stop me and enact as the chief executive that I feel that D.C. should get all that I can give it as the chief executive. I would change the climate of the debate. I think that most of the country does not understand what has happened to the district, which is why I raise it everywhere I go, which is why it's on my webpage from the beginning of this campaign. And I think that we could create such a public outrage that those in Congress could not vote against it if it became a public issue with a president that would put it in front of the American people. We cannot continue to let the lack of democracy in Washington, D.C. become the dirty little secret of American politics. I would willing to guarantee you that most Americans don't know that the district is treated like this and would be appalled if they found out.
We do have to move on. Colbert I. King.
Despite having one of the nation's toughest gun control laws, the district has one of the highest homicide rates in the country for a city of its size. And there's been a move in the Senate to weaken the district's gun control laws to allow residents to keep firearms in their homes. As president, would you sign or veto such a legislation? We start with you, Ambassador Brown.
I've got to tell you, that's a toughie. I don't know, I was not aware that this was an effort in the Senate just now, but I have to tell you, people want to be able to keep guns in their home. I've been a supporter over the years of reasonable gun controls. But at the same time, I don't think that we can, under the Constitution, deprive people of the right to have guns in their homes if they want it. It's a tough issue. It's one that Democrats have had difficulty with over time. But I have always maintained that responsible gun owners have nothing to fear from reasonable gun controls. I believe that the district's legislation in this area is reasonable, and I think it should be upheld. But if the law were to be changed to allow people to have guns in their homes, I don't believe that it would be appropriate to undo that.
So you'd sign it?
Pardon? I would sign it, yes.
Congressman?
I don't think we want to encourage people to have guns in their homes any more than we want to encourage concealed carry. What's happening, though, in our society is that the level of fear that's being drummed up, and I have to say this administration is playing a substantial role in it, has created a concern about people protecting themselves. And we have to understand what's driving this, this undercurrent that causes people to believe that they need guns in their homes to protect themselves. I mean, you have a country that's spending half of our budget for the Pentagon and cutting funds for housing and education and job program and even veterans. And so this, as president, I would set a tone that would not only make Americans feel more secure, but help to have an international policy that would in fact make us more secure by limiting the possibilities of terrorism through our policies and also by cooperating with the world. Here at home, we have to focus on creating jobs and housing and health care and some of those things that
Congressman,
make
I'm
for
sorry, we have to move on
insecurity,
to the Reverend Sharp.
addressing it. Thank you.
I would not sign it. I would veto it. I do not think that allowing a legislation that would put guns in people's homes will in any way stem the problem of violence. It may increase it. Anyone familiar with the proliferation of guns in our urban areas, anyone familiar with the problems of growing youth gangs, I think that we would create an even more adverse circumstance. We'd be turning our communities into the OK Corral. People say, well, if people know that a victim has a gun, they might not commit the crime. They may shoot quicker. And I think that we cannot risk that. I do not understand the schizophrenia of 2004 politics where we have NRA-sanctioned progressives. I mean, this is really nuts as far as I'm concerned. Either you are a real progressive or not, and I think that a lot of these laws are designed to help the NRA and the NRA mentality, and I do not think Washington, D.C. should be part of that. We ought to stand up and go after gun manufacturers and others.
We are back with more of our candidates debate in just a moment. A break here for traffic and weather together. Lisa Baden is standing by for us from the WTOP.
Hello again from the News Channel 8 studios. As we take a break from the debate for another minute, we've got more for you on the D.C. primary candidates. The third major candidate to appear on the D.C. ballots is, as well as taking part in the debate, Reverend Al Sharpton is perhaps best known for his lifetime work as a civil rights activist. But his efforts have led him now to the political podium. Sharpton has been involved in politics for some form for about 3 decades. It's his first run, though, for the presidency. He's run 3 times for the U.S. Senate in New York State, but the Pentecostal minister has never held public office.
You're watching News Channel 8's special coverage of the D.C. presidential primary debate with major primary candidates Dennis Kucinich, Carol Moseley Braun, and Reverend Al Sharpton.
Allen here with Mark Plotkin, Colbert I. King, and Bruce DuPoit, along with 3 of the Democratic candidates for president on the D.C. ballot who show in the national polls, Dennis Kucinich, Al Sharpton, and Carol Moseley Braun. We go back to Bruce DuPoit now.
Thanks, Bruce.
I'm a voter in the district, and I want to know why Lyndon LaRouche was not invited.
And she's not
Remind
Bruce
the
DuPoit.
audience, too, that if you cannot behave, we will have to take you outside. We do expect good manners here.
Why was Lyndon LaRouche not invited?
Bruce, why don't you go ahead and proceed with your question, which we can hear.
Reverend Sharpton, federal law prohibits the district from spending its own money to lobby for voting rights. Can you think of anything more outrageous than Congress making the district second-class district residents or second-class citizens, and then on top of that telling them they can't take locally raised funds to lobby to repair that problem?
First of all, please don't take them outside. It's too cold. Bring them downstairs until we finish. It's warmer.
I'm glad you were able to follow the question.
What I don't understand is why they're
I'm
always
an
so
old
rude.
protester, so I respect people's right to protest, but it's cold
Yeah,
outside.
but they're just always so rude about it.
I think that it is an absolute disgrace that this has been imposed, because in effect they are saying, let's have a fight, but we're going to handcuff you and not let you use your ability to fight and use the dollars of taxpayers who want to be enfranchised in a way that would help in that goal. So I think that is a very, in my opinion, insulting and offensive way to try and limit the lobbying on behalf of the district. And I think it is a misuse of power. You cannot have a democracy where you limit, particularly those in the capital of that democracy's right to lobby, right to be heard, and right to go forward. And I think it's a disgrace that needs to be dealt with, and it should be dealt with in 2004.
Congressman Kucinich, should the city, in willful and intentional violation of the federal law, spend local money, its own money, to lobby for voting rights, to prove that they're not going to accept the situation as it is now, the status quo, and to engage in civil disobedience, if you will?
I see this as a First Amendment issue. It's a free speech issue. And the district should have the right to be able to pursue its own needs and its own civic agenda. If anything, your question arises from a condition that is absolutely repugnant in a democracy. And so this, if anything, the question proves the point as to why it's absolutely essential for the district to have both voting rights and statehood.
Senator Braun.
Frankly, I think it's probably this gag rule is probably unconstitutional. It is a First Amendment issue. There's no reason why the district shouldn't be able to advocate for itself, just like every other interest advocates for itself. And to raise the district's issue to another level, in advocating for statehood for D.C., you're advocating for our democracy, for making our democracy better, for expanding and perfecting our system of government. It is an outrage that this administration that has given us the Patriot Act, given us gag rules on lobbying by D.C., they continue to trash the First Amendment in ways to shut down legitimate discourse about what kind of country we are and what kind of country we will be. And so I think it is very important that the citizens of the District of Columbia be allowed to be heard, have an opportunity to be heard, that every effort is made to advocate for changes that will improve the way our government works, and statehood for District of Columbia would be that kind of improvement.
Mark Plotkin.
The chairman of the Democratic National Committee has said to me that he told all 9 candidates not to participate in this primary. I ask each of you, do you think that is the role that the chairman of the Democratic National Committee should play, Terry McAuliffe? And second, would you keep Terry McAuliffe as the chairman of the party if you were the nominee of the party? Reverend Sharpton.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's the role of the chairman of any party to tell candidates not to regard the citizens of this country and not particularly to regard the citizens of the district and to go against their own principles. As I've said, I've been involved in the statehood movement from the beginning, and I've never lived in the district. I mean, everyone else in the race just about, because of service to Congress, has lived here. I fought for it and never lived here. I had no ulterior motive other than I think that it is unprincipled and I think it's a disgrace. So I do not think that is the role of a chairman. Secondly, if I'm the nominee and have something to say about the chairmanship of the party, I would deal at that time. I mean, if I happen to be the nominee, I'd love to see somebody like Dennis Kucinich be my chairman. He and I have...
Wait, you told me I was going to be your running mate.
Well, Mark had a better idea for you, Dennis, so... But lastly, I must say this. I cannot speak for the other 9, but Terry McAuliffe never told me not to participate in anything. I think if Terry McAuliffe ever dreamed he gave me orders, he'd wake up and apologize.
Congressman
Kucinich, did the chairman of the party ask you not to participate? And second, if you became the nominee, would he still be the chairman of the Democratic Party?
The chairman of the party never had any discussion with me about not participating. As a matter of fact, you know, everything that I've heard and people that I worked with to be here is that you know, the party understood the status of D.C. and trying to have recognition with this preferential primary and with the caucuses that would come later, and that it seemed to be entirely compatible with the direction the party leadership was taking. Now, having said that, you know, I think that each nominee of the party gets the opportunity to choose who his or her chairman or chairwoman would be. And so I would, at that time, carefully consider who the chair of the party should be, and I would certainly be willing to entertain Mr. McAuliffe's application. But I think it's not wise for us to be attacking the chairman of the party when we are trying to organize Democrats for the purpose of trying to win an election.
Ambassador?
In the first instance, the election for delegates to the Democratic National Convention will not happen until February here in the district. The purpose of this primary, this vote, as I understood it, was to express support for the district and for the residents of the districts in terms of their rights for statehood or for representation in Congress. So I remained on the ballot for this because I have been an advocate for representation in Congress and for statehood for so many years. It would have been just unthinkable for me not to stay on the ballot. But it's not the real deal election as presidential candidates for delegates. That doesn't happen until February. The chairman of the party never said to me or to my campaign not to participate because I think, if anything, this whole process is around defining the direction of the Democratic Party. And if the district residents come out and vote in this early primary, what it will do is send a signal to the rest of the country that this is an issue that our party is going to be unified about. And I think that that's a very positive development and a good thing.
We'll come right back with a chance for the candidates to ask some questions themselves. We go to traffic and weather together now. Lisa Baden is in the WTOP Traffic Center.
Back in the News Channel 8 studio, I'm Dave Lucas with more information on the fourth of the major candidates whose names will appear on the D.C. presidential primary ballot. You've been listening to him during this debate. He's Dennis Kucinich. The Ohio congressman currently holds a seat in the U.S. House. It's his second office up on Capitol Hill. Kucinich was first elected as a senator from Ohio in 1994. He then took that congressional seat in 1996. But during his service here in Washington, he's been something of a political maverick. This is a comeback, though. Kucinich hadn't held office since 1979, after he was a controversial mayor in the city of Cleveland, Ohio.
You're watching News Channel 8's special coverage of the D.C. presidential primary debate with major primary candidates Dennis Kucinich, Carol Moseley Braun, and Reverend Al Sharpton.
Mark Plotkin, Colbert I. King, and Bruce DuPoit, along with three of the Democratic candidates for president on the D.C. ballot who show in the national polls. At this point, before we get to closing statements, we want to give each candidate a chance to ask a question of one of the other candidates. We start with Congressman Dennis Kucinich.
I would like to ask Ambassador Mosley Brown a question, and if Reverend Sharpton would like to answer it as well, it'd be fine. Do you agree with me that universal single-payer health care ought to be a defining domestic concern for this country?
Absolutely. The only way we're going to solve the continuing health insecurity that the American people suffer, the only way we're going to be able to take the burden of health care insurance off of our job-creating capacity, small businesses and large businesses alike are not creating jobs because they have to pay such high premiums for health insurance, is to go to a single-payer system modeled largely on what the federal employees currently enjoy. A single-payer system that does not have price controls, that allows people to choose their physician and their provider as well as their their administrator of the program, that maintains the quality of care in this that Americans have every right to expect, will not only give us universal, comprehensive coverage, that is, say, from wellness and prevention to long-term care, but bring everybody in for coverage that can never be taken away, and will give our economy a boost by reducing the wasteful spending that we have witnessed for advertising and paperwork and transaction costs associated with health care. So I think this is a critical issue and will be the first initiative of my administration.
Sharpton, next question is for you.
Answer his question or
no? You get to ask a question.
Okay. I'd like to ask Governor Dean, why are you not here today? I would like to ask him, since you've received so many political endorsements in the district, and so much of the political establishment support, don't you think you embarrassed your supporters by not standing up on a day the district needs your help? I would like you to explain to your supporters why you're absent, why that seat is empty, why you didn't come to the D.C. Democratic Party dinner, why you're not expected to be in the district this weekend. I think you owe it to those that put their reputations on the line for you to explain to them your absence.
And allow just a moment for the response.
You just contradicted yourself.
Next question, Ambassador Carol Mosley Braun.
To Congressman Kucinich, do you believe that our capacity to provide for domestic security and our domestic stability and to revive our social fabric would be enhanced if we reprioritized military spending?
Yes, I do. The fact of the matter is that 50% of our discretionary budget for fiscal year 2004 will go for the Pentagon. And when you look at what the priorities are, with 6% for health, with 10% for education, training, employment, and social services, we need desperately to change what our priorities are. I advocate a 15% reduction in the Pentagon budget, which would in no way adversely affect our national security, just eliminating the waste and the bloat from it, and putting that money directly into a program to create universal pre-kindergarten for children ages 3, 4, and 5. I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Reverend Sharpton if he wants to.
I would agree with that. I think that we cannot continue to act like we cannot question the spending in the military area, and that it is un-American or unpatriotic to review those areas. So I concur with Congressman Kucinich on this point.
At this point, we move to closing statements. We can start from the right and work our way left. Reverend Sharpton, you begin with 1 minute closing statement.
I think that Tuesday is an important day to show this nation the self-determination and self-respect of the members of this district, and that statehood is not just some theoretical dream, but it is practical democracy. I ask for your vote because I've stood on this issue. I've come into this district and campaigned actively. Last night, my radio ads went up, the first in my campaign, on 5 local stations, because I want to show I'll put my money where my mouth is. And I think it is important that the people of the district show this country they're serious about statehood. I've spent a lot of time in South Carolina, And many of you saw the story where, after all of these years, it had become revealed now about a child that Strom Thurmond had. In many ways, the district has been treated like the member of the family that the nation denied. And I think that we should no longer agree to be the silent child of America. We need to come forward and say we're the nation's capital. We deserve the same enfranchisement as the other members of the American family.
Congressman Dennis Kucinich.
Thank you very much. I have an apartment in the district. I work in the district. I'm on the committee that has oversight over the district government oversight, and I've worked with Eleanor Holmes Norton on so many issues affecting the district's social and economic needs. I'm here as an advocate for the district, for its voting rights, for statehood. I'm also here as an advocate of cities, because the district typifies the challenges which face all American cities and the disparities which exist, particularly racial disparities on matters of unequal distribution of the wealth, reflected in disproportionate amount of unemployment among African Americans and other people of color, among the lack of a living wage, the increase in poverty. These are issues we must address, and that's still another reason why I believe it is urgent that this country get out of Iraq, that we bring in UN peacekeepers and get our troops home, because we are wasting the wealth of this nation in Iraq. We're already spending $155 billion there, and some people have talked about being there for 5 years or more, which means over $1 trillion could be spent at the risk of our domestic agenda. I thank you for the chance to be here. Thank
Ambassador Carol Moseley Braun.
Thank you. When our Constitution was written, women could not vote. Blacks were counted as 3/5 of a person. Poor people could not vote. But the whole of the history of the United States has been moving in the direction of expanding and perfecting and improving our democracy. As we have fought for progress on so many different levels, so too we must engage our efforts to fight for progress in regards to the status of the District of Columbia. This historical situation for the district has to be changed, because modern realities require that the people of District of Columbia have the same legal rights, the same constitutional rights as citizens of any other part of the country. And so it is that with my campaign for peace and prosperity and progress, an essential part of the progress means statehood for the District of Columbia. We have to begin to take on this issue in a very serious way as a matter of national priority if we are going to bring the American family together. I believe strongly that we have to approach these issues in ways that will bring us together in unity and stop the kind of
Sorry, Ambassador, we have to go take a quick check for traffic and weather. Lisa Baden, what do you have?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Lucas with News Channel 8, and as the D.C. presidential primary debate wraps up, we want to remind you, all district voters, that the 3 candidates you've seen on stage won't be the only names that you're going to see on that ballot next Tuesday. In fact, 11 candidates are competing in the January 13th balloting. And yet even that doesn't include the 5 other major presidential candidates who have captured much of the national attention. Opting out of the D.C. primary are retired General Wesley Clark, Congressman Dick Gephardt, and Senators Joe Lieberman and John Kerry, and also John Edwards of North Carolina. Those candidates have all chosen to not take part in the D.C. primary election.
A candidate who was opposed.
You're watching News Channel 8's special coverage of the D.C. presidential primary debate with major primary candidates Dennis Kucinich, Carol Moseley Braun, and Reverend Al Sharpton.
Dave Lucas with you here in the news studio, and there you have it, the lone debate among 3 of the Democratic presidential candidates who will be on the ballot in January the 13th. Stay with us. The news continues here on News Channel 8 right after this.